All right, Alexander, let's talk about U.S.-China relations. Blinken went to Beijing. Blinken arrives back to D.C. Biden went to California. And Xi Jinping is a dictator. And it looks like we're back to where we were before the Blinken trip to Beijing, which is U.S. and China relations are at a historic low point, and they're not going to recover. And preparations for conflict in the future, perhaps. What are your thoughts?
I think that's exactly what's happened. Now, can I just say, I think what has happened since over the last week or so validates completely our analysis, the one that we gave about a week ago, when the Biden comments about Xi Jinping being a dictator were first publicized on the White House website. Now, just to remind our viewers, what we said at the time was that Blinken went to Beijing. He was given a very, very rough time by the Chinese. He had 7.5-hour talks with the Chinese foreign minister. He then met Wang Yi, the head of the Chinese Politburo, who is another overall charge of foreign policy. He also gave Blinken an extremely hard time. And then he was taken straight out of the meeting with Wang Yi and brought before Xi Jinping himself. And Xi Jinping, over the course of a 35-minute meeting, basically said the same thing all over again, though in a much more emollient language. But the idea was that Blinken would go to China. He'd weather the storm of all this Chinese criticism, but he'd get a working party together. He'd set up a working party that would prepare the way for a summit meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping, perhaps in October. And the US was also hoping, apparently, that out of the Blinken visit, military talks between the Chinese and US militaries would resume. And the Chinese flat out refused to resume military talks. Biden heard, you can actually see the timeline here. He got reports about what had happened in Beijing. He was absolutely furious. He was probably also nettled by Republican criticisms from some Republicans that Blinken had kowtowed to Xi Jinping in China, in Beijing, over Taiwan. So he went out of his way to basically insult the Chinese all over again. So Xi Jinping became a dictator. Xi Jinping had been humiliated with the balloon incident. Xi Jinping China had become isolated. The US had created this huge alliance against China in East Asia. All of these completely gratuitous comments. And then, of course, and this can only have been done on Biden's direct instructions, all of these comments are then published on the White House website so that the world, including the Chinese, can see it. And then, of course, we had the State Department scrambling to try to repair the damage, say, this is Biden, he didn't really mean what he said. It wasn't really US policy that he was reflecting, except over the next couple of days, the State Department, it's extraordinary, by the way, it's the State Department that for once acted as the voice of moderation, if that's the right word. The State Department and the rest of the US bureaucracy fell into line. We got more and more reports that more and more US officials were also now starting to talk about Xi Jinping as a dictator. We get reports in the media that this is the consensus view across the American government. And so the line is the one that was established by Biden in California. The Chinese have got wind of this. They're absolutely furious. They've just issued further statements reiterating again that military-to-military contacts between China and the US will not resume until sanctions on Li Shangfu, the Chinese defense minister, are lifted. And at the same time, we've also had reports that they're upgrading their military preparations. There's talk that the Chinese are now looking at the possibilities of a total war in the Eastern Pacific, which is a pretty ominous development. whilst the United States, for its part, now looks like it's going back to the whole attempted economic strangulation of China by restricting high technology sales and tightening up on the CHIPS Act. So this trip by Blinken that was supposed to make things better has ended up by making them worse.
Yeah, much worse. How's the Biden White House going to pull this off? The whole escalation with China. Are they going to get the EU on board? I saw that Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, she actually called for the EU to start breaking ties.
Yes.
With China. I mean, they're stuck stuck bogged down in Ukraine. How exactly are they planning to pull this one off with China?
You see, this is the trouble. I think that in terms of Biden himself and some of the neocons around him, confrontation with China is actually their comfort zone. It's something that they are much more relaxed and happy doing than seeking some kind of rapprochement or easing of tensions with China. Viscerally, they hate China. They hate Xi Jinping. They see Xi Jinping and China as a huge rival. They're getting all kinds of pressure from all sorts of people, like the Germans, for example, and people within the US, and including people within the US military. There was a long piece that came out recently which said that US logistics are nowhere near prepared to create the framework for an armed confrontation with China in the Pacific. So they've had pushback from these sort of people, these more rational people, telling them, look, this isn't the time to seek a confrontation with China. So they decided, they felt pressured, if you like, to do this thing. They sent Blinken to Beijing. They never really had their hearts in it. And now that, of course, it's all gone wrong, they are back to doing that which they prefer to do. They're back in their comfort zone again. And that's I'm afraid, the reality of it. So I don't think that they are especially embarrassed by this affair. I think in some ways, at some sort of deep level, they're relieved that this effort has failed. And I think that in this, as I'm sorry to say in so much else, Meloni and Baerbock and people like that are their reliable master's voice. So when Meloni says, we must now move to cut off all our links with China, crazy idea, by the way, when Baerbock talks in the same sort of way, they are reflecting the ascendant mood within amongst the hardliners in Washington. So, and that tells us something else, by the way. Whenever there is going to be any attempt to try to improve relations with China, all it will take is the minutest thing, and these people will revert to type, and we will see instead the situation continue to deteriorate, and the crisis between the US and China, and between China and the West deepen.
Even China and the European Union?
Even ultimately China and the European Union, because though Germany, all of these countries, France, all of these countries are very worried about this. They don't really want to go down that route. They're now trapped because of the decisions they took last year over the conflict in Ukraine. They have empowered the hardliners amongst them, and they're now finding it impossible to push back, even those of them who perhaps have enough understanding that this is getting out of control. They really don't know how to stop this, how to get off this escalator, because they themselves joined for the ride. They expected it would all be easy and straightforward with Russia, and now they're trapped in the same thing with China. That's the mistake you make if you put reason and logic to one side and appease the crazies around you. you will empower them and you will lose control to them. And that's what they've done.
Yeah, boy, if people thought that the economic situation has deteriorated with Russia because of the bonehead sanctions they've placed on Russia, China is going to be an entirely different ball game.
Well, absolutely. And of course, I mean, we now had statements from the central banks in Europe all saying that interest rates are going to go on rising. And I mean, this is creating, Europe is already in recession. Germany's in recession. Britain is in recession. And of course, it's going to get much, much worse. And then, of course, you do what Meloni wants. And of course, Meloni came to power in Italy because Italy's sunk in an economic malaise and has been so ever since it joined the euro 20 plus years ago. Well, what we see is that ultimately her priorities are different. Crisis with China will deepen the crisis at home. Well, not just deepen the crisis, it will deepen it by an order of magnitude. But this isn't the priority that these people have.
All right, Italy needs to ditch Meloni and ditch the euro, and then things will start getting better.
Absolutely. I mean, you'll have a year, perhaps two, of difficulties, and then things will sort themselves out as they always do. I mean, I've been saying that for years. We've been saying that for years. People just don't want to get this because, of course, they are trapped. Also, they're prisoners inside this narrative, and they don't want to risk the turbulence of the first year or 2 years.
Yeah, they don't want 1 or 2 years of difficult times, very difficult times for many years, maybe even decades of better times.
Absolutely, and hope and real hope at the other end.
Yeah, and control and sovereignty.
Control and sovereignty at the other end. Okay. But this isn't what they want. They're scared. They're ultimately scared of that, or they're in themselves anyway compromised and tied with the existing system.
All right, the Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, and Telegram, and go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.